Hey, how's it going guys? Kris here, and today we're going to be going back in time to take a look at some of the best revolvers to feature in the many different Battlefield games over the years, highlighting a few of my favourites along the way. The revolvers often function as a high damage alternative to the pistols, often sacrificing some of their stats in favour of having more power and range. Being handguns, they can be equipped as secondary weapons, and they have a very similar purpose to their pistol counterparts, but they can often be riskier weapons to run with due to their generally slower firing, higher recoil nature. Despite this though, the revolvers can still be a hell of a lot of fun to use, and can give the user extra benefits that the other pistols can't. In this video, I'm going to be going over some of the ones I preferred using the most in the Battlefield games, and giving you my own personal best list of 8. But do remember that it's all subjective, and make sure you let me know and discuss which revolvers are your favourites in the comment section down below. There's quite a few to pick from, so I'm pretty interested to see which ones are the most popular amongst you guys. Anyway, let's get on with it. So in 8th place is that short-barreled Bulldog from Battlefield 1, a gun exclusive to the support class that has some really useful properties, making it a great sidearm to complement your primary weapon. Now the Bulldog might not seem to be a particularly fantastic thing to be equipping if we go off its base stats. It's got barely any range at all, having some of the weakest damage over distance compared to the other revolvers, sharing that damage model with the number 3. Plus, because it uses a loading gate, the Bulldog's also going to take quite a while to reload, as you're going to have to swap those empty rounds over one by one, which could potentially leave you in a bit of a kerfuffle. So as its own thing, it's probably not the most reliable weapon in the world as a whole, but as a sidearm, there to give you a bit of extra backup, the Bulldog can quite often be a lifesaver. It's got the fastest deploy speed in the game of under half a second, which is a really important factor to consider when choosing a secondary weapon, as it'll let you get it out quicker and start shooting sooner. Plus it also happens to be the fastest firing revolver in the game too, which, combined with that nippy switch out time, makes it really useful for finishing players off and getting some extra damage downrange quickly. The Bulldog is also blessed with generously low recoil stats too, making it one of the most accurate revolvers in Battlefield 1. And overall, so long as you sneak off behind some cover to reload the gun from safety, it can be a really handy thing to have in a situation where your main gun runs dry, and you just need a bit of extra close range power to get you through a fight. Next up, we're heading over to Battlefield 5, where we'll be able to find the Model 27, a revolver that actually came along a little bit later on in the game's life cycle during the war in the Pacific. Other than the likes of the Welrod and the Liberator, the Model 27 was one of the slowest firing handguns in Battlefield 5 by a pretty large margin, only shooting at 105 RPM. It also had the slowest deploy speed of all the sidearms too, so in a way it was kind of the opposite to Battlefield 1's Bulldog, that we just talked about a moment ago. But as you might suspect, all these lazy stats are countered by the gun having a really impressive damage model. Not only being really powerful within those short sight lines, but also being able to hold on to that power for longer, giving it some very impressive damage figures over further ranges, allowing it to take down other players with full health in just 4 shots, even if they're far away. It's not the strongest revolver in the series, but it's definitely a force to be reckoned with in Battlefield 5, especially compared to a lot of the semi-automatic pistols in that game, punching huge chunks out of your opponent's health bar and letting you put people down fairly quickly over range, despite firing so slowly. Recoil wasn't the best, sometimes forcing you to pace shots out a bit to get them to land on target, but it was generally a pretty good choice if you liked high damage secondaries. Not always a reliable one, hence why it only comes in 7th place, but still an effective one over a variety of different ranges. In 6th place is the MP412 Rex, a revolver that's been in quite a lot of different Battlefield titles from the Bad Company games, leading up to Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. No matter which game you pick it up in, the MP412 has always been a decent choice, actually being one of the most effective sidearms in Bad Company and Battlefield 3, down to it having some really good kill times, along with being a solid choice in Battlefield 4 as well, having a nicely balanced set of stats with lower amounts of spread and quicker than average reloads, which definitely come in handy with the gun only holding 6 rounds at a time. It probably wasn't exactly the most popular sidearm in Battlefield 4, where it had a fair bit more competition than the previous games, mainly down to the fact that it fired a bit slower than a few of the others, slightly increasing its kill times. But nevertheless, it was still a very worthy sidearm to pick, only shooting slightly slower than the Unica 6, but having better stats in other areas to make it feel a bit more manoeuvrable on the go, in the end making it a pretty well-rounded option that was dependable and balanced. So over the whole series, the MP412 Rex still holds out as one of the best revolvers, being a strong secondary weapon to equip in multiple titles. Another revolver that features in quite a lot of different Battlefield games is the .44 Magnum. A handgun well known for dealing a hell of a lot of damage per bullet, and retaining quite a lot of power over a good distance too. Just like Battlefield 5's Model 27, the .44 Magnum is another one of those revolvers that trades a lot of its speed and accuracy for brute force, sacrificing some of its effectiveness within closer ranges by making it a bit more useful over further distances instead. Hence why quite a few people like to slap a scope on there for dealing with targets a bit further away, a tad easier. I guess you could say that it's one of the most practical sidearms for mid-ranged engagements, with some very strong advantages and weaknesses to affect its overall usability. Slow reloads and a lazy fire rate will often make it less competitive against players up close, so a lot of people will be put off by this, as it's definitely not the most reliable option in the Battlefield games, sometimes seeming to be a bit tricky to get to grips with for general play, functioning in the same kind of way in all the titles it's featured in. But when it comes down to it, it's these characteristics that make the .44 Magnum so unique, individual, and effective in its own right. Often a far better gun to use against people further away, having good stats to benefit longer range use, like a faster than average bullet speed and better damage over range. It's not for everyone, but it definitely deserves to be on the list for that raw power alone. Heading over to Battlefield 1 next, where we'll be able to find that Webley Fosbury, aka the Auto Revolver. A gun that you'll be able to equip on a medic loadout only, that's got a really solid balance of stats to make it viable in most situations. The Auto Revolver was quite a lot of people's favourite sidearm in Battlefield 1, because it was not only one of the few revolvers to use a speed loader, cutting down reload times, thus making it more dependable in between gunfights, but it also happened to be one of the fastest firing too, matching up with the BODEO, just being slightly slower than the Bulldog. Range wasn't exactly on the gun's side, with that damage dropping off fairly early, but having that extra speed meant that it was not only more effective in close quarter battles, but it was also better at keeping you engaged in the fight due to those snappier reloads, all complementing its use within shorter sightlines, where you're often more vulnerable to attack. Having a decent recoil pattern with a pretty low vertical kick was another thing to round off the Auto Revolver's overall usefulness, making it a trusty weapon with a great balance of power, speed, accuracy and reliability, sometimes seeming like a more adaptable choice for many different situations you'll find yourself in as you play the game, being a simple yet surprisingly versatile gun to choose, and one of the easiest revolvers to pick up and do well with in Battlefield 1. Coming up in third place is the SW40 from Battlefield 4's Naval Strike DLC, a really bloody good revolver for aggressive players who like to get closer to the action and take down enemies nearby. The SW40 sort of functions a bit like a less reliable but more accurate version of the Desert Eagle, having the same fire rate and close range damage profile as that gun, with lower recoil values, quicker recoil recovery rates, and tighter spread whilst moving, making it a really deadly sidearm with good mobility stats. Of course, you haven't got some of the ammo benefits that the Eagle has, which is pretty typical for revolvers compared to semi-automatic pistols, as the SW40 only holds 6 rounds, and takes a fair bit longer to swap out those empty cartridges, using a cylinder rather than detachable magazines. But considering all the other revolvers in Battlefield 4 hold the same number of shots, and generally take a tad longer to reload, well, this puts the SW40 more on par with them as far as its overall reliability goes. And the fact that it has quite a few stats to make it deadlier, and even easier to control than some of said revolvers, having both the fastest fire rate and lowest vertical kick reading of the revolvers, makes it one of the most effective choices of the lot, especially in CQC. It's not the most accurate weapon, so it's not always a great idea to go spamming the trigger when you're taking on someone further away. But that lower upwards kick will at least make it feel fairly stable as you fire shots out in quick succession, making it seem a tad easier to control as you gun people down quickly up close, thus giving you a lot of short range power and snappy kill times. In second place is the Webley Mark 6 revolver, which appeared in both Battlefields 1 and 5, and turned out to be an excellent secondary weapon in the two games, especially in the latter. The Mark 6 came along as a DLC gun first time around, and had quite a lot of competition during its time in Battlefield 1, with there already being a fairly wide selection of different revolvers and handguns to choose from. Despite this though, it still provided you with some of the best balance of stats, kinda working in a similar way to the Auto Revolver, but with a slightly slower fire rate and nippier reload speeds and deploy speed, perhaps making it a tad more dependable and manageable on the go. But when it returned in Battlefield 5, it instantly became one of the go-to choices for a lot of players, especially for snipers and recons, which needed a close quarter alternative to deal with enemies that strayed too nearby. The Mark VI pretty much retained a lot of this balance from the last game, and even improved on it in some areas, having swifter reload speeds, better range, less spread, and lower kick. All things that would make it a bit of a beast within short to mid distances, usually being able to knock people down in just 2 or 3 bullets, while performing adequately over distance too. It didn't exactly have much competition in Battlefield 5, being just one of 2 revolvers. But because it was such an effective and versatile high damage weapon, arguably one of the best sidearms in the game, it became a fundamental choice to a lot of players' loadouts, some of mine included. So anyone who's watched a lot of my Battlefield 1 content just might have seen this coming. The BODEO 1889 definitely isn't the most obvious gun to be hitting the top spot of a ranking video, as it's a revolver that often gets ignored and forgotten about in the Battlefield community, probably down to it being exclusive to the Scout class and having those fiddly gate-loaded reloads, where you're going to replace each cartridge one by one, which can be kind of annoying sometimes. This is literally the only thing that lets the BODEO 1889 down though, because it pretty much does almost everything else right to a certain degree, or at least everything that you would want a revolver to do anyway. Not only does it fire quite fast, matching up to the auto revolver, but it's also got better range, countering one of the main drawbacks that the other quick-firing revolvers have. This boosts the damage further, and extends that 2-shot kill range beyond most of the others, making it more competitive in those situations where your enemy might just be a bit outside of another gun's comfort zone, which is a lifesaver in more situations than you might think, giving it some really impressive kill times out to a decent distance, even capable of beating a lot of the fully automatic primary weapons in one-on-one gunfights. The fact that the BODEO is also blessed with a bunch of other well-balanced stats, from a decent deploy speed, muzzle velocity and recoil pattern, gives it even more potential to excel and do what it's designed to do really effectively. It's definitely one of the Battlefield series' hidden gems, and it's one of the best revolvers it's got to offer so far. Just remember to reload in a safe spot or whenever you're not vulnerable, and the good old trusty BODEO will always be there to have your back, whenever you need it most. So those are my personal top 8 revolvers in the Battlefield series, but like always, do let me know your favourites down below in the comments, and why you like to use them. Be sure to subscribe and apply all notifications to be the first to see new Battlefield content coming up in the future, and of course, thanks for watching. I'll be seeing you in that next episode.